Thank you all for coming here to the Ocean Ballroom again for our next plenary speaker, who really does not need any introduction, but I'm going to do an introduction anyways. So, we are going to play Two Truths and a Lie about Mike Epter. So raise of hands if you think one is a lie. Number 1, Mike Epter is the president of Cord. Number 2, Mike Epter started a residency program under protest. Number 3, Mike Epter used to own a gas station. What do we think? It's number 3, but by way of a fun story about Mike, because this is Mike. Mike is a regular guy, and he happens to be the president of Cord. We learned from Derek Haas today that Mike started his residency program in Nevada, sort of under protest, so that is the truth. And then number 3, Mike did not own a gas station, but he did own a car detailing business. And what was it called again? Mike's Auto Detailing. So with that, we all welcome Mike Epter, president of Cord.
Thank you. So thank you. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here. So it was an auto detailing business, but it was only one employee, which would be me. And that's, I used to do it out of my house. So it wasn't very successful, or else I wouldn't be standing here. So anyway, so this is When Uncertainty Was My Co-Pilot, and it's a really personal story that I'm going to take you through, and how 6 months basically changed my life forever, and how this has become really a footprint and left an indelible stamp as to how I became a better person, a physician, and certainly some of the other things that I'll talk about. So I'll go through the blueprint really quickly, with the most important one being number 2, which is really some of the events and experiences that I went through. I learned a tremendous amount of things, and I want to be able to share that with you so that when you go back home, maybe life will be a little bit better than it was today. So I have no disclosures, with the one exception that I would ask all of you in the room, do any of you fall into one of these 2 categories? A mother, sister, wife, daughter, or doctor, and a father, brother, husband, son, or doctor. And the answer, I kind of know this, is absolutely you do. And this is what makes this talk incredibly relevant to everyone in the room. And I would probably take the audacious move to say that this will be one of the most important talks that you'll ever hear in your lifetime. So it's frightening how one day, one moment, one event can change your life completely. And I'm going to detail that event now. So this is actually Friday the 13th in 2011. And this is the hallway, literally, that I was standing in. And I was on one side of the hall, and a neonatologist is going to be on the other side. So there was literally, I was standing here, and a neonatologist is right there. And I'm going to kind of play this as much as possible as to how he played it for me and what he said to me. So this is 8 minutes after the birth of our first children that my wife and I had, or she had. And he says, and this is the way he tells me, well, your twins are alive, barely, in the NICU. You know, we intubated following delivery due to low APGARs, extreme prematurity, poor lung function, and they're very low birth weights. We're going to place umbilical lines, and we're going to do intensive measures. So I give you about a 99% chance that you'll leave the hospital without either. And even if one survives, the likelihood of a trach and peg is nearly a guarantee. Silence. And he continues to hold himself against the wall. I'm incredibly speechless. And he knows I'm a physician, by the way. And he then proceeds to turn around and give me a quarter shoulder at most. And he tells me this. Oh, congratulations. And he walks away. So, try to take that in for a moment, because that was the moment that I lived nearly 6 years ago. So neonatal units, right? They're not really for the faint of heart. I didn't do a neonatal rotation when I was a student. I don't have my residents do a neonatal rotation. So this was kind of my first experience that I ever had. And I think in order to really immerse yourself in what I was involved with, it's important to actually understand just about what the children look like after they were born. So into the world will come Michael and Sasha in a moment. Michael is here. Both were born at 24 weeks on the nose. And Michael weighed less than 500 grams. And then Sasha is here. And she weighed just slightly over 400 grams. So to put that in perspective, the next time that you bake a cake, one weighed 3.5 cups of flour and the other weighed 4 cups. And as you can see, this is incredibly difficult, even for someone like me to visualize. So, you know, they say that men have this incredible talent, right? And females say this about us, of selective hearing, right? So what do you think I heard in this discussion? So what do you see that is most concerning? Marianne, I love you. What do you think? Sorry I caught you in the middle of chewing. I always catch people in the middle of chewing something, but that's fine. I mean,
it depends on how optimistic you are versus how pessimistic. If you're optimistic, you hear your twins are alive. If you're pessimistic, you hear 99% chance of leaving the hospital without either.
Right. So I heard this. This is the only thing that I took out of the conversation. That you have a 99% chance you'll leave without either, and if nothing else, disability is going to be the fate for them. But then I heard this, and this was incredible, because I think the open wound was the previous slide that I had shown, but this was kind of the ultimate. And I realized at that point that things would never be the same for me in a lot of ways. And it really marked a moment in life, and I think that for other people, there's different moments that occur, but this was a moment that was marked in my life when you realized nothing will ever be the same from this moment forward in your life. And time gets split in half, literally between before this and after this. And that was 2159. So, you know, there's moments in life that you really savor, right? So what are some of the things that you savor? What experiences? Dara? Sleeping in bed with your kids. What else do you savor? Roger?
Don't even.
A good pizza from New York. Exactly. That's what I was thinking. Give me another moment you savor in life. Janet?
Quiet and coffee in the morning.
Okay, wonderful. Anyone else? No one is out of my purview. I've got full reign up and down these rows. Kathleen, what do you savor? What are special moments in life you savor? Time with your kids. Okay. So here's some of the things that I came up with. There may be a turning point in history that's wonderful, right? Most of us, unfortunately, can peg exactly when bad things happen. But driving alone, maybe your first paycheck, first kiss, mine was a disaster, but nevertheless, I still remember it. So it is what it is. I'll take the credit for the badness, believe me. Falling in love, getting engaged, married. But I think nothing hits the top of the list for anyone higher than the birth of your child. And that moment was absolutely robbed by this physician from me. And then, thank God my wife wasn't there. She had her own problems to deal with as a result of the preterm labor. But this moment was a disaster because of one individual. So, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she wrote On Death and Dying. What is she famous for? Do we know? Wonderful. Excellent, Fiona. The 5 stages of grief. So she was an American psychiatrist who worked with terminally ill patients. She left her indelible stamp on medicine with these 5 stages of grief. And as you are all aware, you can fall into any one of these. This doesn't have to happen in a 1 to 5 count. And it comes with a slew of emotions. So which emotion do you think I was suffering from at that moment the most? Anger. I was pissed off that this had happened this way with a fellow physician. In fact, my answer is that doctor was an asshole. Plain and simple. And I swore at that moment, I was like, Michael, do not ever come off this way, even a quarter this way, to someone who's that broken up with a situation. So here's the first lesson I learned, is to never lose your empathy. So to me, the key to any successful patient-physician therapeutic relationship is to be empathetic, to simply understand emotions, beliefs, the states of mind of your patient. And I try to really put myself in their shoes with any patient encounter that I have, because for me, it drastically changes your perspective of the relationship, and it also prevents monotony, which certainly we see certain patients over and over again with the same complaints, and you can help to eliminate that by being a little more empathetic. Even today, we obviously teach medical students pretty actively. You're always told, well, you have to keep at least an arm's length emotionally away from the patient, because if you do that, you're able to make more competent decisions and you won't make mistakes. And so keep your distance. Be 30,000 foot view, not 3 foot view. And my answer is, that's bullshit. So, going forward, I want you to tell me who said this. Famous person in medicine who said patients may forget what you did, IVO2 monitor, right, oral boards, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Who? Greg Henry. Who? Maya Angelou. More famous. This guy? Chandra, you got an answer? Maya Angelou. No. I did. What the hell's wrong with you people? I said that. So, ABCs, right? This is ground into us every day. Airway, breathing, circulation. So to me, I tell the residents you have to add another C in, which is these. Cure into care. Well, how often in your career are you literally going to save a life? Now, I know that's what we do. That's what emergency medicine has. Oh, you save a life. But to me, it's not that often that actually happens, right? But 110% of the time, for every patient that you see for the rest of your career, you can care. In fact, I'll tell you that my last save was July 3rd of last year. That actually could prove that I'm really not a good doctor if I haven't saved a life since July 3rd of last year, but we're not going to judge me for that, right? Exactly at this moment. And where was it? It was at Costco. Not even in the department. So, I'm going to tell you this story because I'm a Costco guy, right? So during the interviews, I tell prospective residents, I'm like, do you have, we sit down together, we introduce ourselves. And they're like, well, do you have any questions for me? I'm like, yeah. Do you have a Costco membership? And they're like, really? I'm like, absolutely. And I was like, is it a black card? So, in Costco, I'm standing there. Now, what's the problem with Costco? Mike, what's the problem with Costco? Abundance. What's the problem with Costco? Ginormous. The problem is that when you go in, you without a doubt are going to spend $400 before you leave. That's the problem. So July 3rd, my wife says, can you go to Costco and just buy one thing? And I said, no. And she says, but I just need the ribs for the grill for tomorrow. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So I get in the car, I drive down there, I get out of the car, and I'm like, okay, I only need to buy one item. This is going to be amazing. So I walk in, my head is down, I'm very concentrated, and I'm like, no, don't look up. These are the items that they want to get you with. Don't look up. So I walk down, I beeline straight to the meat, I get the meat, I pull it right up, I walk straight to the line. I get on the line, and I'm standing there, and I'm next to go. Ribs are now on the cart, on the thing. And on the overhead, we need medical personnel to the snack stand. So, and this alarm goes off, which I never heard before there. And so, what does any quality emergency physician do at that point? No! You stand there. And you put your hands in your pockets. And you do the 360, and you're like, someone's gonna respond. And I look up, and I'm like, damn it. So, I rush over, this guy's choking on the hot dog, really bad shape, and ultimately, jaw thrust, everything works out. Now, what's the problem here? I return to the line, and my ribs are gone. So this manager comes over and he says, can I get you anything? I'm like, yeah, my ribs. He says, we don't have any more. I'm like, so I saved a life and I don't get the ribs. So make sure you care because you'll do that much more than cure. So 1 week later, after their birth, here's what happens. 1:27 in the morning. My daughter becomes hypotensive, febrile, and develops abdominal distension. And this was felt to be secondary to the indomethacin, because she later goes on to show pneumoperitoneum. And they decide to call for a surgeon so that a drain can be placed, they can run her bowel, etc. So emergent surgery is performed at the bedside. And to show you just how much in life I don't know, I thought when they said, we have to do surgery, Michael. And I'm like, okay, well, when do you take her downstairs? And they're like, what do you mean downstairs? And I said, well, this is not really a sterile environment. And they're like, no, we do it right here. And I'm like, wow, okay. So they go ahead, they perform the surgery, they put the drain in. Unfortunately, she goes into septic shock, and she begins to get triple antibiotics, she third spaces, she goes into DIC, and not to be graphic, but like she literally looks like the Michelin man, just so edematous. Nothing like that photo even that I showed you before. And she becomes unresponsive to fluid administration. They throw literally the kitchen sink at her. And they begin to then, quote unquote, max out dopamine and max out epinephrine, whatever that means. So they determined that in order to call for termination of resuscitation, you have to ask the neonatal ICU director to come, and they call her in. And at 8:35, there's no thing up here on the slide for that, a cardiothoracic surgeon comes in and says, hi, I know things are really bad at the moment. He was actually very empathetic. But he's like, we need to perform surgery on your son and do a PDA ligation. And I'm like, now? Because literally, Michael is here in his incubator, and all you really have to do is just do a 180, take one step forward, and Sasha is being resuscitated on here. And it becomes incredibly realistic to my wife and I that in the next hour, we may lose 2 children. So that's what ends up happening. And they call for an emergent head ultrasound, as all of you know, certainly at this age in terms of birth, There's a high risk of intraventricular hemorrhage that can be associated in the neonatal population. And at 9:10, we decide to call for a priest, because we look at it that I'm like killing Sasha here by having this continue. And if she's going to be taken, that at least God is with her at this point. And at 9:31, I asked them to step away from the bedside and stop. So the next lesson I learned is you got to invite families to witness resuscitations. And I think all of us probably universally do this in pediatrics. By show of hands, do you pretty much universally do this in the adult group? Okay, so certainly a majority of you, which is great. Because, it still remains to be a controversial topic. It's highly debatable. There's this ethical dilemma involved for some to have this, and there's no widespread implementation. Although these associations, including the ones who we work most closely with, ENA and the Association of Critical Care Nurses, who would know the most about this, I think they endorse this across the board with these associations. So what is the problem with FPDR, or family presence during resuscitation? Basically, that there's, the studies are not that great, and they're small in number, and one study will say, the resident delivered one less shock if the family was present. But then there's another study that refutes that. So the purists, in terms of researchers, will say, well, there's no double-blind randomized controlled study with regards to this. So actually here, to me, is one of the, kind of like, if you will, landmark articles with regards to FPDR. It appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine a couple of years back. And this was done in France. So what they did was they took 570 families of patients who were having CPR performed by pre-hospital units, and there was an ER physician there too, who transported them to hospital. And they randomized into two groups. So one was observation, so literally the family would get to observe what was happening. The other was standard practice, meaning they wouldn't observe what was happening. And their primary endpoint was how many of these family members have post-traumatic stress disorder in 3 months. And then they looked at some other interesting endpoints for secondary look: anxiety, depression, were there more lawsuits, what's the effect of this on resuscitation team, etc. And I'll tell you pretty quickly here, without boring you with details, that there was no difference in terms of how we were as providers, which proves to me one thing: we are incredible at what we do every day. And when it really is on the line, we put our best foot forward and do it better than anyone else. And we block out distractions. So were you more stressed? No. Were you able to communicate with your colleagues? Yes, equally. I felt the way I usually do. Absolutely. So what about these primary endpoints? Post-traumatic stress disorder, higher if the family members didn't witness. Anxiety and depression, higher. Resuscitation, no effect if the family was present. And in fact, when family members are there, it buttons everyone up in the room, very frankly. They don't talk about the basketball game last night or play on their phone because they know a family member is there and it's not deserved. Stress on staff, no effect. Lawsuits, this is France, so this doesn't count here, but no interest. Obviously in the US, this would be different. But nevertheless, so if you look at even studies going forward from this, 14, 15, 16, 19, and even this year, the one caveat is that as long as a staff member is there to accompany the patient, this is a more widely endorsed thing. Obviously because it provides closure and knowing that we did every single thing possible for that family member. So, we happen to be in a luxury, all of us in the room, versus if you're in a community hospital, you really can't be in two places at once. But I usually lay back during one of these, talk to the family member directly, and I can still keep an eye on residents running resuscitations. Versus in other places, whether it be social worker, whether it be charge nurse, somebody should do it. So, That's some of the lesson that I learned. So at 9:32, the medical director says to me, I need you to step away and come with me. So I have this concept of what I deem coping insurance. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to go through one of these events in life to have, but any time that we're dealing with something, you need to have 4 variables in place. Decent sleep, we had none. Nutrition, not going to eat hospital food. Certainly weren't exercising. And you need social support. And you would think, Mike, didn't you have a lot of social support? The answer is, there were plenty of people who wanted to lend a hand, but the answer is no, because we didn't want them to go through the pain we were. So I really didn't even tell my mom what was happening. Dawn didn't tell her mother, because it was like, we didn't think this would end well at all. So we built up a wall around us. So we had none of the 4 of these things, but certainly if any one of these legs is unequal in your life and you're making big decisions, it makes coping insurance a risk. So the next lesson I learned is you have to have escapes in life. I'm sure all of you are sitting here and like, hey, what can I do that there's definitely one activity that you can do on a daily basis or 3 or 4 times a week that you feel somewhat like you're in the zone, as they describe athletes. You're stress-free, you're really enjoying yourself, you're not worried about all the other things that we worry about on a daily basis. And I mean, if you think about this, brains that are bathed in stress hormones do not function as well or think as clearly as stress-free brains. And stress is a response to life's events, but we have very little control over life's events. Once it happens, it's there. So if you go looking for happiness, joy, that's what you'll find. But if you look for stress and heartache, that's what you get. So have an escape. But more importantly, even with that, you gotta prescribe them. So these days, we have phones, we have things that, we check an event in the phone, etc. I actually have these for residents. When I think they're really a little bit in trouble. We certainly talk about this during a semi-annual evaluation every single time. What are you going to do for yourself this week? And then give me one thing that you do for yourself once a month. So the concept of rewarding for all the hard work that they're doing. So to lighten up the mood slightly in the room, say, Ernie, would you like some ice cream? Sure, Bert. I know I'm not going to be a comedian when I step down next year. I get it. But I love it. So one activity that I want you all in the room to think about 3 to 4 times a week. For some of you, that's biking. For some of you, that's going to the gym. For others, it may be journaling. For others, it may be meditation, yoga. But commit to the activity 3 to 4 times per week, at least. And then do one bigger activity once a month where you really have to invest some time and block time off. Remember, what do we value the least until it's gone? Our health. So you have to take care of yourself first in order to do anything beyond that. So don't work out like this. I mean, But self-awareness and self-care, definitely one of the critical ingredients to resilience, right? So the next lesson I learned is you have to assess yourself. And I did a lecture the other day with Dan Rundy, and we have the MBI for educators. So if you want to do that, you just email me, and you can take a quick look, and we're happy to provide that to you. One of the things, there's Wellness Index out there. There's the MMPI. So if your chair or medical director comes to you and says, Mike, I think you should do the MMPI, you have to step back and say, not today. Why? Because the MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Index, is to identify mental illness. So you want to pass on that if they throw that one in front of you at HR. So, I'll make this pretty simple for you. Who's this? Lone Ranger. So, what does the Lone Ranger believe? That only they can do the work in front of them. So if you belong to the Lone Ranger fan club and practice that, you definitely are at more risk, okay? So I know this is incredibly challenging in education for all of us. We keep, but you've got to delegate somehow. And realize that you've got great people around you in your residency program who can do great things. Let them do it. Next, I'm a perfectionist. What is the problem with perfectionists? They don't tolerate mistakes. So be careful here. And then perhaps my greatest hospital slide ever, the workaholic. And what do? What's the coping mechanism for a workaholic? To work harder. So if you fall into any one of those three categories, even without filling out bubbles, it puts you at a little bit higher risk. So really be careful. So we're back in the unit, and at 10:57, 9 days after the previous event, the EP tube falls out of my son's mouth, and he gets resultant bradycardia. This code pink is called. 25 people rush to this little square bed incubator, and an annoyance happens, very frankly. Why? Because the providers didn't pay attention to detail. And how do I know this? Because I'm sitting there the whole time, and I'm watching that, ET tubes of this age, they're like this long, right? So they're very likely to fall out. They're very difficult to tack down. And the tape was coming loose. I said to the nurse, do you mind fixing the tape before you finish your shift, before turnover rounds? Sure. Okay. Now, being in medicine, I'm like, well, they probably got busy. So the next nurse came on. I said, oh, do you mind fixing the tape? It's loose. Sure, I'll get to it in a bit. So an hour and a half later, while she's on the internet doing a hospital module and checking the internet, her email, this happens. So you have to pay attention to detail and realize that when you're on shift, all eyes are on us from the moment we walk in to the moment we leave. And you set the tone for your shift in every way. So, how do I know that? Because I watched. All of us deal with students and residents, and they're going to emulate and mirror the behavior that you show them. So if it's you start yelling or you start getting frustrated, then they may say, hey, that must be okay. This is the person whom mentors me, etc. So I'm going to do this in the future, right? So I look at it this way. You can be grouchy Smurf or happy Smurf on shift, or one of the 7 dwarfs, right? But it's the concept of, practice with an inordinate amount of happiness. So we had 2 different neonatologists. One who came in, who truly was happy Smurf. He would fly in from Seattle, do 4 consecutive night shifts, sleep in the call room, only eat hospital food, and fly back to his family. Every time he would come in and he would say, Michael, Dawn, what can I do for you? Can I show you the labs? Can I show you the x-ray? You want to look at the blood gas? What don't you understand about what's happening here? And what made him even better is he didn't give me that because I had the medical card. He would go around to all 60 beds and he would do the exact same thing. And I'm like, you, my friend, are incredible. Especially under the conditions he worked. Or grouchy Smurf. So we had this other neonatologist, and every moment something was wrong. Like 60-bed NICU, 15-bed census one day. I'm like, wow, this is great. Only a quarter, full. She's like, it's still a disaster. Okay. So it's pretty hot in the Southwest, right? 105, 110 degrees in the summer when this was happening. I'm like, wow, it's only 95 today. She's like, it's still blistering. I'm like, okay, probably not going to be helped at this moment. So I'm like, well, maybe, we can sweeten her up with a little coffee or something along those lines. I'm like, look, I brought you some coffee. I don't like cream. I'm like, forget it at this point. So, but you set the tone, right? So I would practice with an inordinate amount of happiness. Next. The other thing is this. Everyone is going to make errors. In fact, hospitals are dangerous to your health. 600,000 patients a year die from cardiac disease, about 575,000 for cancer. But in some looks at this, there's over 400,000 patients a year who die from preventable medical errors. That's incredible. So how do you deal with medical errors in your institution and for yourself? Do you fall into the conspiracy of silence, the salute to stay mute, for fear of punitive actions, judgment, stigmata placed on you? Well, I think you need to establish venues in your emergency department. Please do this for the residents, for your own department, because it'll help you, them, and everyone in between. Because there's forms that should be established for looking at harm, medical errors, because if you don't have a venue to discuss medical errors, and certainly if residents don't have this, but even ourselves, then it allows them or you to arrive at a conclusion that may not actually be supported by facts. Inadequacy, certainly for the younger people in the room, the fear of exposure or the imposter syndrome, right? And then the loss of control. So try to take the initiative to actually establish these forms within your department because they're critically important to physician resilience. And be excellent, but don't be perfect. Why? Because excellence allows for errors and perfectionism does not. And mistakes are normal. So 299 days is the total amount of days that my wife and I spent in the NICU. And here's this scales, right, that I look at for, Maslach-Burnout inventory is based upon the things that you see on this scale. But to me, what really burns us out is emergency physicians. So Medscape, they just did one of their more recent surveys and published this. And if you click on, there's an emergency medicine report that you can generate out of this, both for residents as well as just our specialty as a whole. And the number one thing is too many bureaucratic tests. And I agree with this. Number 3 is increased computerization of practice. The previous year, or they do it every 2 years, excuse me, the computers were down in the 9th spot. But I mean, they've really changed a tremendous amount and caused us to spend less and less time at the bedside. The total patient encounter that we spend as emergency physicians at the bedside, if you take when we did history and physical, then move to coming back, maybe detailing results, telling the patient their disposition, is now clocked at 7 minutes for their whole entire patient encounter versus the inordinate amount of time you spend behind a computer. But too many bureaucratic tasks. So here's things that burn me out, or that certainly we face as a result of working where we do. And I'm sure there's a lot of other things that you can come up with that are real dissatisfiers. But perhaps doing more with less is really hitting us now. What I think burns us out more than anything else, I'll take the bureaucratic tasks, I'll take the computer issue, is not being thanked or appreciated for what we do. The other day when I gave a different talk, I literally said, and I have a couple of residents sitting here, so feel free to tell me this one time to make me feel good, but I said, when is the last time a resident came up to one of you and said, "You're doing a fantastic job"? And I'm thinking, I would syncopize if I was a program director and I was told that, But you certainly know when you're not doing a good job. So, we happen to have, so this is my lesson learned. You gotta overthank and acknowledge people. You've worked a difficult shift. Well, probably those nurses have worked that difficult shift. Tell them. And be like, you did fantastic. Okay? Tell the residents who really work their ass off for us how good a job they're doing. They've got duty hours. We get on them for PBLI logs, all these different things. Tell them, because they'll work harder for you because they know that as a leader, you are backing them. And at the end of the day, if they know that I'm their number one advocate, hopefully not their worst enemy, not their best friend, but if I'm their number one advocate, then I can go to bed at night and be like, you've done okay. So we happened to have, when I was there, we had a chair of our department who would go to the guy who was cleaning the floors, the janitor, Jesus, every time. And he would say, thank you for cleaning my floors in the emergency department. And I looked at him and I'm like, And it was incredibly impressionable because no one who tells him that, right? And he says, you make the department cleaner for my patients and they're going to appreciate that when they're here instead of coming to a dirty emergency department. So it's pretty powerful. I mean, honestly, that guy after that, he was squeegeeing, mopping every single day. I mean, it was beautiful, the place. Windows are being cleaned, rugs are pulled up. It's wonderful. But do that with your EKG tech. How often do you say 60 EKGs a day? Patient comes in triage. Oh, I think I sprained my ankle. Well, we're going to get an EKG because there's definitely some viscerosomatic reflex that might be elicited from the heart here. So here, get EKG. I know you're only 18, but who cares? So, but the first time that we don't do the EKG, that person doesn't do the EKG right, we'll criticize, right? But they're working pretty hard. So let them know that. So I'm going to take you through some numbers here as we're closing down. 4 is the total number of doses of Infraserv that was received, 2 PDA ligations, 11 head ultrasounds, cranial ultrasounds, 25 days under the Billy lights, 24 assessments for retinopathy of prematurity, which really plagued my son, 92 days on the ventilator, 12 days on an oscillator. And that was one of the more frightening things that I've ever seen, that literally my son was levitating every moment in this incubator. 196 total chest x-rays, 12 septic workups, 8 of which were positive. A total of 64 different therapies were given, drugs, all kinds of things, over time, and ultimately leading to 85 different diagnoses on a discharge summary. What I learned from this: don't sweat the small stuff. We gotta think macro versus the micro and the weeds that we can get stuck in at the end of the day after we work. You are gonna go home and other people will not. They will lose loved ones. You're gonna go home to people who love you, who care about you at the end of the day, and who want to be with you. For those of you in the room who have kids and spouses and everything else, when you get off that plane tomorrow or today and you go home, you're going to feel love. And that's the most important thing versus, wow, I just got an AFI for research. Sorry, Steve, we'll improve on that. But I just got AFI for research. You got to think macro, okay? So I think this is fantastic. It's not my idea, but end each day by listing 3 things that happened to you for which you are grateful. This comes out of Enjoy Every Sandwich. I don't know how many of you in the room have read this. This is a book by Lee Lipsenthal, who was a internist who ended up with esophageal cancer, died in his 40s. And it's a great read. It's quick. But he would make sure that this was done. This is the concept of repeated appreciation and gratitude. If you literally list these things each day, and I have a rolling Google Doc for years at this point, after learning this concept, you really seek out things and find a better outlook on the day. And the list can be 3, 5, 8 things long. But if you're doing it, it becomes this deliberate practice. I would encourage all of you to do it at the end of the day. And it also makes your day finish on a high note versus on a low note. So think about that and maybe try that. Next lesson, pray. I don't care who you pray to, but pray to someone. And if prayer is talking to God, then meditation is listening for the answer. So mindful meditation has been shown to be really an effective resilience strategy. Some of you will use other things that you see before you hear, but make sure that you do something. Social connection is extremely important to extroverts in the room, so make sure you have time for that to occur as well. Next lesson, prioritize, okay? Which I had talked about. So I know many of you will think, wow, this is kind of a really awkward slide, but if you take a look at the cemetery here and look at this grave plot, and I have this actually on one of my home screens, this is what it says. My name, beloved PD, physician, coworker, husband, and son. And hopefully all of you will find this really impactful and realize that if I end up defining myself like that at the end of the day, I really failed. So it reminds me to keep things in check and make sure that the ones at the bottom are really at the top. So, in making the turn towards home here, remember you have to do introspection. Introspection has been shown in multiple studies to be the critical element and difference between those who are resilient and those who lack harmony or balance in their life. And I have this poem that I take a look at pretty frequently. I'll go down to the one at the bottom, which is, you may fool the whole world down the pathway of years and get pats on the back as you pass, but your final reward will only be heartache and tears if you cheated the man in the glass. So again, do introspection. Never get so busy making a living that you forget to make a life. And schedule time off for yourself. If you can schedule meetings, you can schedule time off for yourself. And realize, which I came to the realization of, here I am involved in a program and being a program director when all this was happening, you wake up and realize you're just not that important. Life will go on without you. In fact, if I didn't have my then coordinator here, running the program with my APDs and other people, the program would have folded. But they had your back. And thus, it's okay to take time off. Somebody was doing this on the beach yesterday. Wrong maneuver, okay? So, dear smartphone, I need a vacation from you. Hope the world will be okay without my updates. So make sure that time off is protected and disconnect to reconnect to families, to friends, and your community. Next, laugh. I hope this comes through. So, let me just give 2 seconds. It's hot as hell in Arizona, okay? It's like a UPS advertisement, our landscape. What can brown do for you? That's Phoenix. So, here's our weatherman on Fox 10 News, and he didn't know this was happening, but I think it's tremendous what he goes through.
We'll bring you on into the temps, and we're all doing okay. Wow, 750 degrees in Gila Bend right now. And 1,270 in Ahwatukee. Now, I'm not authorized to evacuate Ahwatukee, but this temperature seems pretty high.
Cade Creek is really
Yeah, Cade Creek, Fountain Hills, they don't look good either. And frankly, Wickenburg is a total loss. You might as well just get out of anywhere along this 60 years. Very warm. Surprise is starting to heat up as well at 1,300 degrees. So, again, the safe spots seem to be Chandler and Mesa. Scottsdale is doing okay so far. But, you're sort of surrounded by some pretty intense heat. So, again, I'm not your dad, but I would get out while you still can. I think steel boils at about this temperature, so Cade Creek, there's probably nothing left up there right now. So don't even bother looting up there. It's not going to be worth it.
So, perhaps the most important thing that I didn't tell you with my numbers is the number 2, because both children survived. So, this is from Easter, actually, the other day. So one other thing that I think is important to know, which somebody brought up as a point a long time ago when they heard this, that medical director really slapped me around. And sometimes, what do we trust more than anything else in the profession? And what do we do better than anyone else in the house of medicine? We have the best gestalt as emergency physicians, the sick versus not. And she said to me, she's like, you do not have the bandwidth to understand anything that you're thinking right now. And if you persist and tell me to terminate this resuscitation, I'm going to have security forcefully remove you from here. And if not for her, I'd have one less child. So sometimes it's just worth to, really pay attention to others, and good things happen. So yes, do they have some some issues? Absolutely, right? The thought process was Sasha had suffered a significant MCA stroke on that day 7 as a result of all the vasopressors and the ischemia that resulted. And but because it happened so early, this is what all the neurologists in the country feel that have seen her, that the brain said, wow, that area is dead, so I'm just going to grow connections around it. So she's been left with some right-sided deficits, some of which you'd have to really pay close attention to, but she's lost dexterity in the right hand, what have you. I didn't even go into the aftercare that was involved with them. My wife has done absolutely phenomenal. She's the star and hero of the family. But at the end of the day, this is the MasterCard commercial, and it's priceless. So I really hope that will make a difference in your life, and I really thank you for everything that you've done for Cord, and thank you for coming, and I really appreciate being a colleague of all of you.